Welcome to the Allied Care Connect podcast, where we explore the people, professions, and perspectives that shape care in everyday life. I'm Valerie, founder of Allied Care Connect and the host of this podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. Today, I'm honored to introduce our first guest on the podcast, Eric Kang. Eric is a registered psychologist with Vital Mind Psychology in Cochrane, Alberta. He supports teens and adults in areas such as trauma, emotional regulation, self-confidence, addiction recovery, and relationship issues. Welcome to the first Allied Care Connect podcast, Eric. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Valerie. It's great to be here for the inaugural episode of the podcast series. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, my first question for you is, how did you get into psychology?
I got into psychology at the age of 17 when I took a psychology class in high school. And, any 17-year-old, when tasked to try to decide what is the vocation that you are likely going to try to commit to for ideally the rest of your life, is kind of what people say. I really didn't have any ideas other than psychology because it was the most interesting class that I was taking at that time. And so when it came time to picking a major in post-secondary, I found that it was interesting enough for me, even though I had no idea really what I wanted to do with it. I thought maybe research back then or working in some sort of lab, but it took me to the realm of counseling psychology, of which I'm very grateful for, as it is now my job as a psychologist to do counseling with people. And so in a way, I kind of got lucky that what I found interesting then is something that I still find interesting now.
Yeah, for how many years have you been practicing?
Probably close to 20 in some capacity in the realm of health and mental health. And so I was kind of fortunate to have found a job straight out of my undergraduate working in a hospital setting where I could see people, even in a kind of a different capacity, maybe not so much one-to-one, but doing intake, doing a little bit of testing, running a small group for patients there. And I gained a lot of experience there. And so I think for most people coming into the profession, you kind of have to continue on with schooling before you can get that kind of education, hands-on education. And so I was able to test out, if this really was for me, and I had continued to enjoy the work that I was doing and learned a lot, just meeting with people, understanding what their problems were. This was an addiction center, so understanding the connection between mental health and addictions, and just even starting to talk to people and learn more about what a psychologist might be doing. So that was a cool experience for me. And I've been able to grow and learn from a number of different areas and settings since that time, including the hospital, functional medicine center, long-term care center, and then now private practice.
Yeah. What was the journey like from these different settings, and what drew you to private practice?
The journey has been an interesting one. So I think it was good for me to be in the hospital setting because I worked in a multidisciplinary system where I got to be around nurses, psychiatrists, other psychologists, social workers, occupational therapists. And so I got quite an eclectic blend of perspectives and ideas around how people approach mental health. And I found that after some time, that setting really wasn't for me. I think it was a bit constricting in terms of the areas that I wanted to look further into. And so I had to move out. I had to end that. relationship with Alberta Health Services and start to dabble in other areas, of which it was not easy to do that. And I think I understand why people stay in that system for a long time, actually, because there is a quite a benefit of, I guess, the sense of security and safety that comes with this kind of setting. And so it wasn't easy to leave that, but I found myself trying to learn in multiple different areas afterwards, and I found that I was able to develop a more robust way of understanding the connection between mental health and physical health and biology and all of these things are still very interesting to me. And so the journey has kind of taken me into, I guess, having more freedom and control. And I think private practice is the venue for me to really dive into whatever it is I want to learn more about. And I can start to practice modalities or ways of treatment that maybe are a little bit outside of the traditional uh, norm, let's say.
Mhm. Mhm. Can you expand more on that? The,
So one of the modalities I use is called AIT, which is Advanced Integrative Therapy, and it is for treatment of trauma. And so I've used this over the last few years with great success. And the way that it works is it's kind of a somatic energy healing modality. And so with trauma, we go into the body because trauma is not so much a cognitive issue. I think people who have experienced trauma know they're not 8 years old anymore when that trauma occurred or however long ago that happened, but their body feels that way when they think about, the situation that was traumatic for them. Their body activates in a way that's like it just happened yesterday. And so with energy healing, this is not so much a method that is so much supported by the typical approach that a lot of psychologists might
like
take.
talk therapy.
Talk therapy, they will say like CBT. The word evidence based gets thrown around a lot, even though there is a lot of evidence for these other modalities, just not investigated to the same rigor as these other ones. I'll say yet. And so as I get to kind of be on the cusp of these kind of modalities, it's really interesting to watch as like people find a lot of benefit very quickly from something like energy healing in ways that talk therapy will really struggle to touch. And so I find that in the private practice realm, you can explore wherever your heart desires, whereas I think in more traditional environments where these other modalities tend to propagate, they might not be so open to trying some of these things, even though, and let's say, even if it's just anecdotal, there's quite a lot of anecdotal evidence that I've found so far as to treating trauma through this modality has been very, very beneficial for my clients.
Mhm. Thank you. I'm interested in as well in your shift towards private practice. What are and having your own business, what are the challenges that you've had to face? You've mentioned a lot of the freedom and being able to practice psychology um, in whatever way interests you or whatever it is that benefits your client the most. It's more you're more open within this realm, and yeah, I'm curious as to what was the journey like from like starting your own business.
Mm. Well, if you want full autonomy, you have to also incur full responsibility. And so setting up the practice was, of course, scary because you are fully responsible for all of the setup, the admin, especially when it's just you, like it was when I started. Honestly, like a lot of this was like answering the phone and then taking out the garbage and then setting up my calendar, and then seeing a client, and then whatever else, answering all the emails and phone calls, and thinking of marketing and all of these kind of things.
Wearing the many hats.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And so being very responsible for the kind of building that system to where it is today. And so we're going to be at 2 years old coming up here pretty soon. And
Congratulations.
thank you. And I feel like it has grown quite immensely since when I first started. And so it was a lot of anxiety at first, for sure, because that's the cost of autonomy, is you have to be fully responsible for everything. And there kind of isn't really a safety net. It's like figure out the thing so that you can keep going. If there's a problem, you have to find a solution, or you have to talk to somebody who can help you, or do, problem solve. And so um, I guess the good news is, it feels a lot easier to run this now. And I have a great team of other psychologists that are doing fantastic work. And so that is also a benefit, because I feel like I have a really cool community to kind of bounce ideas from. We do supervision every week. And so we're all very tuned into our various practices, and we can give each other guidance constantly. And so that part I really, really like about private practice, because, even though there's a multidisciplinary team in the hospital setting, I did feel like it was a bit fractured, as in people weren't always able to, at least where I was, to fully connect with each other and offer perspectives. It just didn't feel the same as sort of the team, the way that we're doing it right now. And so we're just very open. I think we're just very open to things, and we can bounce ideas that are maybe a little bit off the path. We can explore things that maybe other people might not. And so things like energy healing are like on the table. And I think we're all just very curious. And so I think, maybe I see vital mind psychology as this crucible where we're all kind of getting better as humans, like even the practitioners, because we're kind of learning about ourselves. We're working on ourselves in this way, of which I think it really benefits the people that we see when we're doing this work.
Mhm. Thank you. I just want to touch a little bit more about um, imposter syndrome, which is, something that a lot of practitioners experience, even with decades of experience in people's belts. Can you touch more about that?
So imposter syndrome is something I've been kind of researching a little bit more. We just put out a first episode of our podcast on imposter syndrome. And so I've been thinking a lot about it, and I see it as a cognitive bias towards a certain type of information. So people with imposter syndrome will often feel like they don't belong in a particular place. So if it's related to a job, for example, they'll think, I'm not very qualified, or I don't know what I'm doing. Everybody else seems to know what they're doing. And they're going to figure out at some point that I don't really belong here. And so there's kind of an underlying anxiety, and there's this feeling that they're different from other people. And I want to differentiate this from maybe somebody who has depression or low self-esteem, where they're kind of like, they don't feel like they're worthy in a lot of areas. Imposter syndrome tends to be specifically focused in one area or a few areas, or there is a global version of it, but it is very different from just feeling depressed or kind of sad about yourself, and that you are paying more attention to the information, let's say the data, that informs you not being capable at something, rather than the information that is. And so somebody with imposter syndrome tends to be more fixated on the mistakes that they make. You know, if they get like a 90% in something, they'll be like, oh my God, see that I didn't get 100. That 10% means that I didn't do enough. And they will really hyperfixate on the elements of their work that maybe aren't there. And they're people with imposter syndrome tend to be very kind of hard on themselves about this. And so I think a lot of this involves changing the way that you think, looking at information in a more balanced way, where that you're really giving yourself, you know, the kudos for the things that go well, especially if you're learning, which we all are. And,
Constantly.
yeah, and to be gentle with ourselves about being in that learning process, right? And so I think that we have to reframe things so that it's this more gentle kind of story around imposter syndrome, where it's like, I'm learning and getting better. And of course, I'm going to make mistakes, as an example, rather than
Yes.
I have to be perfect, or I have to show that I am competent all the time, of which, you know, there's a lot of pressure from a narrative like that, if that's
Yes.
something you think, right?
Yeah. I'm curious as to um, narratives. Do these pertaining to like imposter syndrome? Do these exist before, or is this learned?
Yeah, narratives come from all sorts of things. And so growing up, you will start to inherit narratives from the people around you, mainly your parents. And so your parents will give you messages like, you can't you can't spend a lot of money because you won't, it's really hard to earn money, for example. So you have to be very careful with what you spend your money on. And so somebody who receives a message like that will start to internalize the idea that money is scarce, and that they will have to be very careful about that. And so you might develop a mindset where you really think about every single thing that you buy, which is not such a bad thing. But you might also develop the sense of scarcity, like there's never enough. And so you always might be really hyper fixated on worrying about money and not having enough of it, and feeling like there's just a small amount in the pot, and that you can't, that you have to be very wary about when it leaves you. And so these are just examples of like how some of these narratives start. And so you have narratives about everything. You have narratives about, let's say, money. You have narratives about how relationships work. You have narratives about who you are and what you're capable of and where you belong and what health is. All of these things are things that you start to internalize. And of course, you have control over some of these elements as well, but it really takes conscious effort to shift a narrative that you might have, especially one that does not serve you, but people can get stuck in, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to circle back on imposter syndrome and perhaps narratives around um, career or growth, because you will experience, we experience imposter syndrome when we help people, or when we're challenged, or if it's like a first time interaction with a client or a organization.
Right.
It's yeah.
I don't think imposter syndrome necessarily is bad. I think
Hmm.
ultimately it comes from this place of love, of like wanting to do a really good job and feeling like you are not equipped to do that. And in some cases, this can be a catalyst for somebody to like learn and grow and become a better version of themselves. So it can be motivation. Or I think for other people, it can be very defeating. So you have this imposter syndrome and it just takes over. Like you're like, I can't do this. And some people in that situation might be prone to giving up. But I think the origin of it is the feeling of wanting to do well, which I think if you are feeling imposter syndrome, it's good to know that this is coming from a good place. And I think if you use this feeling as a fuel source, you can actually get better at something very quickly. But I would kind of urge people to do this out of a place of love. And so you can use this imposter syndrome to be like, I care about my job, I care about doing well, and so I'm going to find a way to do my best to like learn as much as I can, talk to the right people, just like really strive to do great. But it can also take on the fear flavor, which is like, people are going to find out, I'm screwed, this is not going to be good. And this can give people massive, massive anxiety for years. People can get stuck in this. And
Yes.
but the other thing I'll say is that I think that the people I respect the most are also people with imposter syndrome. Like, you kind of can't think that you're too amazing at something and be really good at it. Usually, like, you can't have too much of an ego. Like, we're all kind of students of life, and I think it's good to be humble enough to feel like you're a bit of an imposter at times. I think it means that you're in a space where you can grow. You
Mhm.
are being challenged, that kind of
Yes.
thing.
And I'm thinking about what you said earlier about h- putting in a conscious effort for these narratives to shift and the effort that it takes. Um, can you share with us many ways where psychology can help you shift and maybe bring that imposter syndrome kind of in the back seat versus it driving your behaviors or driving your the way you show up as a professional?
Mm. I think people can get stuck in their own perspectives, and it is really important for every human being to expose themselves to alternative perspectives, because alternative perspectives have a lot of information that you can't see by just being you. Like, you're too close to you. And so somebody looking at you from a certain distance can see something that you can't. And so I'll share that, in my own imposter syndrome journey, I've had practitioners in the past tell me that I'm very hard on myself. And it's been a constant theme that's come up when I've talked to people. And so when I hear this enough times, I go, oh, yeah, that is something that I do, even though like I kind of know that, but it's hard to recognize that, perhaps because I just have thoughts as a person. And the more thoughts repeat, the more normal and constant they become. And when they become constant, it's sometimes hard to really see them as a pattern. But when you can externalize that pattern and somebody can tell you what they know and they can ask questions and explore that and kind of give you a perspective of like, you can change without having to be hard on yourself. Like, you can make mistakes and not have to beat yourself up for something like that, for example. Then I might go, oh, you're right, like, that's really interesting. I guess I don't have to do that. And so a psychologist or going to counseling can really uncover patterns and ways of thinking, ways of behaving that aren't serving somebody's highest good. So for me to receive that feedback from people, it has been a journey to shift that for myself, because it was like pretty constant for me, like a negative kind of self-talk in the past. But having that outside perspective and understanding it more has allowed me to consciously shift that, like, oh, I shouldn't be so hard on myself. And then you make decisions over time to slowly kind of move that and replace that narrative with a new narrative.
Coming back to the part where you talked about AIT, is there a connection with the way we feel imposter syndrome in our bodies? And is it something that you also apply to kind of consciously shift out
Hmm.
from negative self-talk?
I think there's a lot of benefit for being able to what's called introception, being able to kind of understand the signals of your body, because your body will give you a lot of information about what it needs. And so with the basic ones, it's like you're hungry, you're thirsty, you need to go to the bathroom, your muscles are sore, you should get up and stretch them, this kind of thing. But if you're paying attention to other sensations of your body, emotions, things that arise when you think about something traumatic that happened, or you think about something that happened to you in your life that's affecting you, your body will give you signals as well. And so sometimes there's a tightening, sometimes there's anger that comes, sometimes there's sadness that comes with these things. And so a lot of the work I do with people is creating this greater connection with people's bodies, because people can experience something, but they may not be able to practice being able to feel into it. And often people make the attempt to mitigate certain emotions or certain sensations. An example would be anxiety, right? People are like, oh, I have a lot of anxiety. And we tend to frame this as a very negative thing. But anxiety is the defense mechanism that all people have to keep them safe. So it scans for danger or potential danger and alerts you to it. And so when it uncovers something that could be potentially dangerous to you, you start to feel anxious. And so this is very beneficial for staying alive. But of course, your alarm system can become very sensitive and start to alert you to things that maybe aren't actually all that bad for you. And so paying attention to that signal allows you to better understand, why is this coming up for me? What does it want to protect me from? And if we can look at it from that lens, we can start to do something about it. Yeah. So you can learn to soften an anxiety response, for example. You can learn to release traumatic energy in your body. You can go into the body and feel into these things, which helps you to heal from them.
Okay, thank you. So I just like to share a little bit. I've practiced yoga for many years, and they always say to come back to your breath. Is breathing a tool to scan and like you said, have that space for interoception where you can become more adept to the signals that come to you? Because I'm assuming when it's the body reacting, it's not yet as coming into the conscious mind. Does that
Mm.
make sense to you?
Yeah,
Or
that's
when
true.
threats are around you, it might not fully be conscious right away.
It's true. Yes, very true. And so, as you know from yoga, if you just do the poses without the breath component with it, you're really receiving probably not even half the benefit of yoga. Yoga is designed for the movements to match the inhale and the exhale deep into the body so that you can start to connect there. And the breath actually is one of the easiest ways to start to activate what's called your parasympathetic nervous system. So for something like anxiety, some deep breaths actually signals to every cell in your body you're safe, because that's the only time you ever breathe like that, is when you're safe. Those nice, deep, and slow breaths. And so doing that kind of breathing starts to affect your physiology within 15 seconds. And so breath is really important to a lot of mental health. And I can almost see, sometimes people are holding so much tension. When I get people to just even take a few breaths, they're starting to soften quite a lot and just let that tension go and relax their bodies. And so the breath is quite a gateway to a lot of somatic benefits, and it is the anchor to creating awareness to the body and to get out of thinking and cognition. So
Ruminating.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right.
So it's a wonderful practice. I think everybody should practice.
Awesome. I just have one more question for anyone who is thinking about booking a psychology session or trying therapy. Um, what would be your message to them?
Yeah, sometimes I get people where it's their first time coming in for counseling and they're nervous and they have a perception of what it is. And sometimes it's based on like what they see in the movies, and it's going to be really, I don't know, serious and stuffy. And at times it is serious. And I think sometimes you have to go into those realms. But I also feel like the connection between the therapist and the client is really the most important element of what you would call treatment outcomes, what you're going to get out of, the counseling process. And so it's really important to find somebody that you jive with, that you have this good connection with, that you feel that you're comfortable opening up to, and that they are there to, listen and understand and offer feedback and perspective and help guide you along the path to the place that you want to be. And sometimes you might have to try a number of people in order to do that. It's kind of like anything. Like if you're trying to meet, a partner, you're going to have to go on a bunch of dates often to
Mhm.
try to understand, what's this person like? What's this person like? And so finding a psychologist is sometimes just seeing who you connect most with. And I would say book a free session, a 15-minute session, consult session, and just talk with that
Yeah.
person and get to know what their style is, what their perspectives are, how they conceive of ideas. And that might give you a good hint as to how that person might be able to work with you to get you to where you need to be. And so I would say it's probably, often it's worse in people's minds what the process is going to be like. And, we've had a lot of people who've said, like, oh, this is totally different than what I thought it was going to be, in a good way. Like, this is
In a
much,
good way.
much more enjoyable or beneficial or even fun, than I thought it was going to be. And so I think if you're somebody thinking about doing counseling, give it a try and talk to a bunch of people and start to explore, open that door and just see, what might be there for you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Eric.
You're very welcome. Thanks very
Yeah.
much.
So thank you to all our listeners out there. Where can they find you?
So we're at vitalmindpsychology.com. If you're in the Cochrane area, you can come see us, or Calgary area, in our office there. We do sessions online for people in Alberta. We also just launched the Vital Mind podcast, which is currently on Spotify and I guess soon to be on other platforms. And imposter syndrome is the first episode, but we'll have other episodes coming soon on other topics that are instructive, kind of like deep dives into certain elements around psychology, as well as open forum conversations with psychologists or people in the community where we just talk about whatever we're into.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks, Valerie.
Bye.
Bye bye. Please note that the views, opinions, and experiences shared by podcast guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Allied Care Connect or the host. This podcast is intended for general informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for individualized professional, medical, psychological, or therapeutic advice. Inclusion of a guest does not imply endorsement of all views expressed.
Thanks for listening to the Allied Care Connect podcast. We hope that added value to your day. To learn more about our guests, check out the show notes and visit us at alliedcareconnect.ca to learn more and explore other professionals on the platform. until next time, see you then.